6 men are crawling through a passage just 25 centimeters high, deep into Mossdale Caverns, beneath the moors of Yorkshire. They don't know that a storm has broken out above them, and that the stream they walked along that morning is already changing color. On the 24th of June, 1967, water will turn 10 kilometers of underground passages into a trap, and Britain will gather at a hole in the rock for the largest cave rescue operation in its history. Hundreds of people trying to take a river's own bed away from it. Why did help arrive too late? And how did it happen that not one of them came home? It all began with a single young woman left waiting at the cave that evening. A young woman stands at the edge of a bog in the Yorkshire Dales, staring at a place that no longer exists. Just that morning, at the foot of a low rocky scar, there had been the entrance to a cave, a low crawl she herself had squeezed into only hours before. Now, water is churning where it used to be. The stream that had murmured peacefully nearby during the day has swollen into a muddy torrent, and all of it is pouring into the rock, exactly where the entrance was. Her name is Morag Forbes, and she is 22 years old. She is waiting for her fiancé. He is underground, and 5 others are with him. They've gone to the far reaches of the system, kilometers of crawling through tight passages, and they're due back late in the evening. Morag knows this cave, and she understands instantly. If water is pouring in from outside at this rate, then underground it is already filling the passages. And those 6 men know nothing about the rain. Under the mass of limestone, you can't hear a storm. There's no radio, no telephone. There is no way to warn them, none at all. All 6 will be coming back the same way they went in, straight into the water. Morag turns and runs. Ahead of her lies dark moorland, pouring rain, not a living soul for kilometers. The nearest dwelling is a farm far below, down in the valley. She runs through the wet heather, falls, gets up, and runs again. That evening, the 24th of June, 1967, would become a black date for an entire country. For now, there is only one woman running across the moor. Hundreds of people will converge here later. And the place those 6 men went into would take on a name that British cavers still speak quietly to this day: Mossdale. A quarter of a century before that night, in 1941, a man named Bob Leakey became the first to seriously push into that hole beneath the scar. He was a caver of almost fanatical daring, and alone, no backup, no partners, he crawled through kilometers of unknown passages. What he found astonished explorers. Beneath the dreary bog of Grassington Moor, a few kilometers from the village of Grassington, lay a vast system, one of the longest in England. But Mossdale turned out to be a cave with a vicious temperament. More than 10 kilometers of passages with a depth of only about 76 meters. The system doesn't plunge downward in shafts. It stretches outward, almost horizontally. And it stretches agonizingly. A significant part of the far passages is what's known as the marathon passages. Hundreds of meters where the ceiling drops to 25 centimeters and the width is barely more than half a meter. A person can only move through there flat on their stomach, arms stretched out ahead, pushing their gear in front of them. There is nowhere to turn around. In the far part of the system, there is essentially only one place where you can simply stand up at full height. A chamber with a telling name: Rough Chamber. In British caving guides, Mossdale was given the highest difficult grade, super severe. Even experienced cavers admitted they didn't like this cave. And yet, people kept coming back, again and again. The reason was water. The stream called Mossdale Beck dives into the cave at the entrance and resurfaces at the powerful spring of Black Keld several kilometers away. Which means that somewhere out there, beyond the boulder chokes and unexplored passages, a continuation is hiding, possibly an enormous one. Connecting Mossdale to Black Keld would mean discovering the greatest cave system in England. That dream drove an entire generation of explorers under the bog. In 1967, one man lived for it more than anyone. A postgraduate student from Leeds named Dave Adamson. A cave in limestone is a natural drain pipe, and that is the whole of its deadly mechanics. Rain falling on square kilometers of bog above doesn't spread across the surface. It gathers into streams and goes underground, all of it, into one and the same system of passages. The bog above Mossdale works like a gigantic funnel, and the throat of that funnel is the very entrance people crawl into. Cavers have a term: flood pulse. After a heavy downpour, the water in a cave doesn't rise gradually, like a river in a valley. It comes as a wave within minutes. A person might hear a growing roar, feel the wind that pushes you back out of the passages, and a quarter of an hour later, the crawl they came through dry is flooded to the ceiling. A section flooded like that is called a sump. There is no air in it at all, and passing through without diving gear is impossible. There are also half sumps, places where a few centimeters of air remain between the water and the ceiling. You can crawl through with your face pressed into that gap, but any rise in the water level closes it too. In the mountains, you can escape rising water by climbing up the slope. Underground, that instinct doesn't work. In a tight crawl, there is nowhere to climb. Between a person's body and the ceiling, there's a hand's width of space. And when the water rises, that space is the first thing to disappear. And there is a second danger, a quiet one. The water in Yorkshire's caves holds a temperature of 7 to 8 degrees all year round. Even if a person finds an air pocket, cold water drains heat from the body dozens of times faster than air does. Hypothermia takes away strength, then clarity of thought, then consciousness. And the clock runs in mere tens of minutes. And one more thing, about the era. This is 1967. Hourly rain forecasts don't exist. All a caver has is a glance at the sky in the morning before the descent. After that, you take your chances. The man leading the group beneath that sky was 26 years old, Dave Adamson, the leader and driving force of the entire Mossdale project. He belonged to the University of Leeds Speleological Association, ULSA, in the 60s, arguably the strongest and most ambitious club in Britain, collecting headline discoveries across the Yorkshire Dales. Adamson believed it was his generation that was destined to break through the chokes at the far end of Mossdale and find the way to Black Keld. Beside him was Jeff Boireau, 24 years old, his partner on the long working trips, also from Leeds. 3 men from Bradford had joined the project: Colin Vickers, Bill Frakes, and Michael Ryan. The 6th was John Ogden from Bolton, 21 years old, physically perhaps the strongest in the group, a man with a reputation for being unbreakable. The youngest of the 6 was 17. The oldest was Adamson himself, young, passionate. For most of them, caving was the very substance of their lives. The plan for the summer of 1967 was almost routine. A series of trips to the far end of the system, beyond the marathon passages, where they were to clear boulder chokes and carry out small blasting work, widening a passage that, by Adamson's calculations, led toward the undiscovered continuation. No record attempt, no audience. The hard, unglamorous grind of explorers. The trips followed one after another. The team knew the route by heart, and the Saturday descent on the 24th of June looked like just another day in a long season. Adamson prepared seriously. A week before the trip, he invited Jim Eyre to join them, a well-known caver and one of the most experienced cave rescuers in the country. Eyre couldn't make it. The Saturday group also included Morag Forbes, Adamson's fiancée. Along with 3 companions, she was part of the support party, helping to carry gear to the start of the far crawls. Around noon on Saturday, 10 people gather at the entrance beneath the scar. The weather is ordinary Yorkshire summer, cloudy, damp, and the forecast they'd seen promised rain, with possible scattered thunderstorms. In the Dales, that forecast sounds almost every day, and every day someone goes underground with it. The stream level is normal. By Mossdale standards, the entrance is dry. Nothing in this picture looks like a warning. The arrangement is simple. 4 make up the support party: Jim Cunningham and John Shepherd from Bolton, Colette Lord and Morag Forbes. 6, Adamson's working party, will go on ahead. Then begin the hours of monotonous, exhausting movement. Mossdale offers no rewards of beauty. It is mud, water, and rock squeezing from both sides. The marathon passages are done lying flat, centimeter by centimeter, pushing off with the toes of your boots. Even an experienced group needs several hours one way to reach the far part, and just as long to come back. That's why working trips into Mossdale are always long. Going in for an hour makes no sense. Everything unnecessary is left on the surface. In crawls like these, every object on your body becomes a burden, and any delay eats into strength that still has to last for the journey back. In the afternoon, at the start of the far crawls, the groups part ways. 4 turn back toward the exit. 6 push on ahead. They still have crawling upon crawling before they reach the work site. The agreement is this: The working party will return late in the evening, and Morag will wait at the entrance. Around 5 in the evening, the support party emerges onto the surface and heads down toward shelter. There's no rain yet. The 6 men underground continue east, deeper into the system, to where dozens of meters of solid rock separate them from the surface, and where any way back takes hours. Barely have the 4 descended into the valley when the sky over Grassington Moor changes fast, the way it only does in the hills. A storm rolls in, first rain, then a downpour, a solid wall without pause. Storms like this hit the Dales locally. Down in the valley, it can be nearly dry, while a wall of water stands over one particular patch of the catchment. And this time, the wall stood directly over Mossdale. Over the next 3 hours, more than 25 millimeters of rain falls on the bog, a month's worth for some arid regions, dumped in a single evening onto a catchment that drains entirely into one cave. The bog responds the way it always responds. Thousands of rivulets gather into Mossdale Beck, and within a few hours the quiet stream becomes a brown, roaring torrent. All of it pours in beneath the scar. Inside, in the first few hundred meters of passages, the water rises to the ceiling. The entrance crawls of Mossdale are completely flooded. Around 9 in the evening, Morag Forbes climbs up to the scar to meet her fiancé. What follows is the scene this story began with: water where the entrance should be, and a run across the night moor through the downpour. The nearest people and the nearest telephone are several kilometers of darkness away. She makes it. At 11:10 that night, the Upper Wharfdale Fell Rescue Association is called out, a volunteer organization of farmers and cavers responsible for this corner of the Dales. The alarm spreads further, to the Cave Rescue Organization, to the police, through the clubs. Through the night, people begin converging on Mossdale. Cavers abandon their homes and their beds, driving over the hills through the same rain that has locked in their friends. By midnight, the first few dozen people stand at the scar, looking at the same thing Morag had looked at hours earlier. Every one of them understands what that picture means. And every one of them hopes they're understanding it wrong. For now, the rescuers can do nothing. The crawl is underwater, and the force of the current is such that any attempt to enter would mean the death of the rescuer himself. Cave rescue is always slow, but here, standing between the rescuers and the trapped, is the river itself. No ready-made playbook exists for an emergency like this. In 1960s Britain, this is the business of volunteers who have ropes, experience, and a telephone chain, but no heavy machinery and no standing command structure. The conclusion the leaders reach before dawn sounds almost absurd. To get into the cave, they must remove the river. Divert the course of Mossdale Beck to the side, so the torrent stops pouring in beneath the scar, and wait for the entrance passages to drain. At night, in the rain, by the light of headlamps and headlights, the earthworks begin. With shovels, they dig a trench meant to carry the stream past the entrance. And no one is giving up hope yet. Those who know the system say, in the far section, there are places above the waterline, rough chamber among them. If the 6 managed to get there, or stayed in the far end, they could wait out the flood in the cold and the dark. How long a soaked man can last at 8 degrees is a question people try not to ask out loud. Where exactly the group is, nobody knows. There's no way to call out to the 6, no way to learn whether they're alive. Above ground, a growing crowd, floodlights, the drone of pumps already being trucked in from fire stations. Below, underfoot, kilometers of black passages and silence. Command of the assault parties is taken by Jim Eyre, the very man Adamson had invited along on this trip a week earlier. Now, he will be sending people into Mossdale to look for a team he could have been part of himself. By Sunday, what's happening at the scar stops resembling a rescue operation and starts to look like a military engineering campaign. More than 300 people have been drawn to the bog, cavers from clubs across the north of England, firefighters, police, local farmers with tractors, soldiers. British cave rescue had never seen anything on this scale before, and never has since. The story instantly breaks into the national news, and reporters climb the moor in the volunteers' footsteps. A dam is built against the river. Across the hollow, where Mossdale Beck runs toward the scar, an embankment rises. The height of a man, dozens of meters long. It is reinforced with sandbags. Around 10,000 of them will be used. 19 pumps, stripped from fire engines, work day and night, pushing water into the diversion trench, away from the entrance. People work in shifts, around the clock, standing knee-deep in mud. The stream forced away from the entrance flows down the slope along the bypass channel. The river is quite literally being moved from one place to another, meter by meter. Up top, everyone understands. This is a race. Let one more storm pass over the bog, and the whole system they have built will collapse, and the water will seal the cave again. The arithmetic is still on the side of the living. Only a day has passed since the flooding, and one day is not yet a death sentence. That thought keeps hundreds of people on their feet. By Sunday evening, the dam and the pumps do their work. The level at the entrance drops, and the black mouth of the crawl emerges from under the water. The first assault pairs go in, the few who can move fast through a super severe system. Their task is spelled out in a single word: find. Everything else can wait. One of the pairs is led by Tony Waltham, a young carver from Leeds and one of the very few in the operation who had ever been to the far reaches of Mossdale. The route is the same one Adamson's group took. Hours of crawling through wet passages where the flood has left its autographs. Foam and fresh silt on the ceilings of the passages mean one thing: the water here rose all the way to the top. To crawl past marks like that and keep your hope alive is a job of its own, and Waltham does it in silence. It's several hours in, even for a strong pair, and any message will travel back to the surface at the same speed, hand to hand, person to person. Far marathon. Here the beam of a headlamp lands on something that, from a distance, looks like a boulder choke. It is not a choke. Lying in the passage one after another are 5 men. The water caught the group in the tightest part of the system, where you can neither stand nor turn around. Doctors would later confirm the cause of death was drowning, escaping a flood wave in a passage that, low, was practically impossible. The searchers have to do the near impossible, keep moving, to check the passages beyond. What if someone managed to get ahead? A message goes up to the commander of the assault parties. It is relayed to Jim Eyre word for word. "Come back, Jim, they're dead." The news rolls through the camp. The work stops. Hundreds of people, at the shovels, at the pumps, on the dam, had believed in air pockets and dry chambers just minutes before. Now the operation's very name changes. This is no longer a rescue, but the count doesn't add up. There are 5 bodies. 6 men had stayed underground. John Ogden is not among those found. For a short while, this brings the ghost of hope back to the camp. Of all 6, it was Ogden who was considered the strongest, the one who was stopped by neither squeezes nor water. If anyone could have torn free of the flood, slipped into the side passages, found a dry pocket, it was him. All through Monday and Tuesday, search parties go into the far part of the system one after another, checking the branches. Up top, the dam keeps working. While the search goes on below, the river cannot be allowed near the entrance for even an hour. One of the parties includes a man whose name means more to Mossdale than anyone's, Bob Leakey, the pioneer of 1941. He is 53, he hasn't caved seriously in years, but nobody knows this system better. The veteran crawls once more through passages he himself once discovered, this time searching for a body, or for a miracle. The end comes on Tuesday night. Rescuer Brian Boardman, checking the tight spots off the main passage, notices a gold ring, and then a boot sticking out of a narrow side fissure. John Ogden has been found. The flood current carried him into a narrow crack, a place where no living person with tools can squeeze in. The doctors and the operations leaders assess the spot and reach a grim conclusion. He cannot be recovered without risking more lives. And by this hour, the weather is turning again. New rain is gathering over the bog, the makeshift dam and trench are holding the stream back with the last of their strength, and everyone understands what a fresh flood would mean for people in the far crawls. The search parties are worn down by days of crawling at their limit. Every further trip into the system is now risk for risk's sake. The leadership makes a decision that would have weighed heavily on anyone: bring the people out and end the operation. Now the word passes from rescuers to lawyers, and before them stands a question British coroners had almost never faced. The bodies of 5 men lie beyond kilometers of passages barely a handspan high. The 6th remains in an inaccessible side fissure. Transporting the bodies through far marathon would mean weeks of work and mortal risk for dozens of the living. The experts deliver their finding: recovery is impossible. For British law, the situation is nearly unprecedented. The law assumes the dead are returned to their families, and here the earth itself will not allow it. Coroner Stephen Brown received special sanction from the Home Office for one of the rarest of procedures, an inquest without the bodies. In July 1967, the inquest convenes in the town of Skipton. The jury hears the survivors, the rescuers, the meteorologists, and returns its verdict, death by misadventure. In a separate note, they endorse a decision the coroner has already made, calling it very wise: seal the cave. The entrance to Mossdale is filled with concrete. The only safe way into the system ceases to exist. The 6 remain where the water found them. For 6 families, this means funerals without graves, saying goodbye to a spot on a map of the bog instead of a cemetery. At the inquest, the coroner pays tribute to the rescuers, remarking with British understatement that their courage and endurance at times outstripped their caution. Within the caving community, the decision to pour concrete splits people apart. Some believe Mossdale should remain a sealed crypt forever, and no one should ever be allowed inside. Others, above all the friends of the dead, are convinced that closing the cave for eternity is wrong, and that their companions deserve a true burial, even if it is underground. No one looked for someone to blame in the aftermath, and no one would have found anyone. The group broke none of the rules of its era. The forecast was ordinary. Their experience was serious. They were killed by a storm that came without warning and by a cave built like a trap. Almost 4 years passed before this story found its ending. In February 1971, a group of the dead men's friends quietly returned to the system. It turned out there was no legal ban on entering through other access points. They made their way to Far Marathon and carried the remains of their companions to Mud Caverns, a dry clay chamber at the far end of the system, beyond the reach of any flood. There, with only their own people present, the 6 were laid to rest. The families had been informed and had given their consent. Dave Adamson, Jeff Boyrow, Bill Frakes, John Ogden, Michael Ryan, and Colin Vickers now had a grave inside the cave they had given their lives to. On the surface, their memory was fixed in stone. Out on the bog, directly above the far part of the system, a stone cairn was raised, and a memorial plaque with 6 names was placed at the entrance. Cavers later reopened the entrance itself, and Mossdale became passable again, but different. People go there rarely, only with permission, and an iron rule born in the summer of 1967 still stands. No one enters this system if there is the slightest chance of rain. The accurate weather forecast that Adamson's group never had became the most important piece of equipment for their successors, more important than rope or light. British caving as a whole changed too. The disaster accelerated the development of the Volunteer Cave Rescue Service. Into the textbooks went a lesson paid for with 6 lives. Underground, the greatest danger comes from the sky. And the story itself was preserved piece by piece by their own. The recollections of those who lived through those days were gathered into dedicated publications so that not a single name and not a single hour of that week would be lost. Half a century later, in the summer of 2017, the Caverns of Yorkshire climbed once more to the scar above Mossdale Beck, no longer to rescue, but to remember. That day, the stream slipped quietly into the rock, as it does on any dry morning. Mossdale remains the worst disaster in the history of British caving, and its deepest grave. A woman is hanging on a rope 740 meters underground, and the water is rising by the minute. Her ascender has jammed. 2 of her companions are just a few meters away, and they cannot reach her. This is the Gouffre Berger in the French Alps, the first cave on the planet where a human being descended deeper than a kilometer. On the 7th of July, 1996, a thunderstorm turns its shafts into living waterfalls, and 6 experienced cavers find themselves trapped on one of the most dangerous verticals in Europe. Why do people who did everything right die in the most famous cave in the world? And how did this one night give rescuers a voice that can pass straight through solid rock? 6 people in caving suits, one after another, disappear into a hole in the middle of an alpine meadow. It's Saturday, the 6th of July, 1996, the Sornan Plateau, high above Grenoble in southeastern France. Sunshine, dry grass, a calm forecast. An ordinary start to a sporting trip, the kind that happens dozens of times here every summer. The team is made up of people from 2 countries, 2 Britons, William Stead, 37, a chemist from Liverpool, and Nicola Perrin, née Dollimore, 30, from Lancashire. Underground, Nicola is anything but a beginner. She trained with the Oxford University Cave Club, one of the most respected in Britain, and she has years of serious expeditions behind her. With them are 4 Hungarians, also experienced, István Torda, 25, and his companions Karoli, Zsolt, and Miklos. They go down in 2 teams of 3. The first is William, Nicola, and Karoli. The second is 3 Hungarians, István, Zsolt, and Miklos. The plan is simple: descend all the way to the bottom to minus 1,122 meters, touch the legend, and reach the surface by Sunday evening. A day and a half underground is a normal schedule for a strong group, because that hole in the meadow is the Gouffre Berger, the Berger Abyss. This is where the history of underground exploration was once turned on its head. The 6 of them go under in high spirits. Up above, a warm July day remains. Less than 2 days separate them from tragedy. To understand what kind of place this is, you have to rewind more than 40 years. The late 40s, the early 50s, Grenoble. The local cavers are obsessed with the riddle of their own mountains. At the foot of the Vercors Plateau, near the town of Sassenage, an underground river flows out of the rock, powerful and cold. The water comes from somewhere. Up above, on the limestone plateau, rain and meltwater vanish into cracks and disappear. Down below, there's a river, which means that somewhere between them, inside the mountain, there is a giant vertical system down which water falls from a height of a kilometer. To find the way in is to find a road into an unexplored underground world, and the people of Grenoble search for it. Year after year, they comb the Sornin Plateau. They inspect sinkholes, dig through rock falls, descend into every promising crack. Most of what they find dead ends after 20 meters. On the 24th of May, 1953, a caver named Gouffre Berger, along with 3 companions, comes upon yet another unremarkable hole among the rocks and pines. From the surface, it promises nothing special, but beyond the entrance, a shaft opens up, and beyond it another, and beyond that, a third. The cave doesn't end. It accelerates downward, like a staircase whose last step can't be seen. In that very first season, the explorers reach a depth of about 350 meters, and that's only the beginning. The passages keep going, and the draft of air and the sound of water hint that the river itself is waiting below. The cave is named after the man who found it, the Gouffre Berger. The people of Grenoble understand what they've been handed. In their hands is not just a deep cave, but perhaps the deepest known to humanity. In the early 50s, the very idea that a person could descend a kilometer underground sounds like science fiction. Here, on the Sornin, science fiction finally has a concrete address. The next 3 years turn a hunch into an assault. In 1954 and 1955, the Grenoble teams break the world depth record twice, pushing the route down step by step. New shafts, underground lakes, cascades. And so the goal of the next expedition is framed with real daring, for the first time in the world, to descend deeper than 1,000 meters underground. The members themselves call it Operation Minus 1,000. The summer of 1956. On the Sornin Plateau, an international expedition gathers, 26 people from 8 countries, French, English, Italians, Belgians, Swiss, Poles, Spaniards, Czechs. The project is backed by the French Army and Air Force. 3.5 tons of equipment are hauled onto the plateau, and a base camp is set up with running water, carried by a hose a kilometer long. Among the members is Fernand Pietzel, a metal worker from near Grenoble. Years later, his name will become the most famous brand of rope access equipment in the whole world. The push happens in August, with underground camps and rotating teams. People spend up to 2 weeks below ground, and the mountain gives in. 19 cavers, one after another, reach the final sump, a lake where the ceiling dips underwater and there's no way forward. The mark, minus 1,122 meters. The Gouffre Berger is the first cave on the planet deeper than a kilometer. It will hold the title of the world's deepest cave for almost a decade. But in the triumphant report of 1956, there is one episode worth remembering. On the 15th of August, a thunderstorm passes over the Vercors, and the water cuts off one of the teams deep underground for a full day. Up top, an alarm is raised. Supplies are lowered down through a waterfall. That time it ends well. The water drops, and the men come out alive. The first warning sounded in the very first year of glory. It was heard, but not everyone remembered it. The decades turn a record holder into a shrine. In the early 60s, the Berger loses first place to other systems, but that only raises its status. Records come and go, yet the first 1,000 stands alone. In 1967, a British team led by Ken Pierce dives through the final sump and deepens the cave to 1,133 meters. In 1982, the Frenchman Patrick Paynet brings the depth to 1,191 meters. In 1990, explorers connect the Berger to the neighboring Fromagère system, and the total depth of the network reaches 1,271 meters, with tens of kilometers of passages. For the world caving community, a descent into the Berger becomes what climbing Everest is for mountaineers. Every summer, teams from Britain, Hungary, Italy, and Australia book their weeks through the local commune, rig the ropes, and head down, not to discover, but to touch. The route is described in guidebooks. The shafts have names. The rigging points are known by heart. In conversation, people call it touristy, rather condescendingly, meaning the road has long since been beaten. But this fame has another ledger too. Over the whole history of the cave, 6 people will die here, 5 of them because of water. The plateau above works like a giant funnel, and the Berger is its drain. After a heavy thunderstorm, the water in the cave rises with astonishing speed, and dry shafts turn into waterfalls in a matter of minutes. What makes this cave special is that it's vertical. Here you cannot step aside from the water, because the way up and the path the water takes down are one and the same line. Every route description warns of this. Cavers tell each other about it around the campfire on the Sornen, and still the number of hopefuls never falls because the statistics look like an abstraction as long as the sky is clear. For William, Nicola, and the 4 Hungarians, that Saturday is a walk through the pages of a textbook. The first few hundred meters are a vertical labyrinth, entrance shafts where the rope disappears into blackness, and narrow, winding meanders where you have to drag your pack behind you. They descend on a single rope with mechanical devices, the standard technique that everyone in the group has practiced for years. Down on a descender, up on ascenders that grip the rope and hold a person's weight. Then the cave flings itself open. A great gallery, a tunnel big enough to hold a railway station, with heaps of cyclopean boulders and an absolute ringing silence. At a depth of 500 meters lies the Hall of 13, named for a cluster of stalagmites standing like stone figures on guard. This is where underground camps are traditionally set up. Even the people of 1956 rested here. Below this, the character of the cave changes. The route reaches the underground river and never leaves it again. Lakes crossed on taut traverse lines, channels where the water comes up to your chest, and cascades, the steps down which the river leaps. Ropes are rigged alongside these steps, in places just meters from the flow. In dry weather, this is the most beautiful part of the descent. The beam of a headlamp shatters in the falling water, and the roar of the river fills the shafts. Both teams of 3 are on schedule. Saturday is spent on the way down. Ahead lie the lower cascades, the famous hurricane shaft, and the final sump. Sunday is the day of return. A long, brutal climb on ascenders back up all those same shafts. And up above, over the plateau, on Sunday afternoon, the sky begins to change. The people several hundred meters underground cannot see it. In 1996, there is no way to tell them. The storm arrives on Sunday, the 7th of July, around 4 in the afternoon. First, rain over the plateau, then a wall of downpour that shows no sign of stopping. The forecast had promised rain, but 3 times as much falls. Over the course of a day, around 240 millimeters come down on the area, a quarter of a whole year's rainfall for some cities. Later, this flood will be called the worst in the district for many years. The limestone Sornen Plateau doesn't hold this water back for even an hour. Thousands of cracks gather the downpour and send it below, into the only drain there is, the Gouffre Berger. What happened in Britain in 1967 to the horizontal passages of Mossdale happens here to the vertical. Not a slow flooding of tunnels, but the very road to the surface turning into a raging torrent. At that moment, the first team of 3, William, Nicola, and Carly, is already on the way up. They have completed their program and are heading for the surface, with hundreds of meters of shafts ahead. Around 9:30 in the evening, the surge catches them. The river swells, and the cascades along which the ropes hang gather enormous power within minutes. Where a stream of water fell in the morning, a waterfall now crashes down. And so, the vertical trap of the Berger slams shut. The three of them face a choice on which their lives depend: to fight their way through the reviving waterfalls while they still have strength, or to stand above the waterline and wait in wet clothes in a cave whose temperature is only a few degrees. Both options are bad. They decide to move. The point where everything comes apart is called the Cascade of the Topographers, a ledge in the underground river at a depth of 740 meters. On an ordinary day, it's a routine obstacle, one of dozens on the route. On the night of the 8th of July, it is a roaring wall of water through which the rigged traverse lines run. Nicola is the first of the three to move onto the traverse and start across the ledge. The torrent hammers at her gear, at the rope. And then something happens that, on a dry day, would have cost a minute's fuss. Her ascender jams on an intermediate anchor, completely stuck. Nicola can move neither forward nor back. She is pinned to the rope, right in the line of the flow. William and Coralie throw themselves into the rescue. They try to reach her, to take the load off, to free the ascender, and they can't. The water won't let them near, and any move in the flow threatens to leave 3 people stuck instead of 1. This is one of the cruelest features of accidents on the vertical. A person is right there, a few meters away, but between them and help is a falling river. Around 10:30 in the evening, the level rises higher still, and reaching Nicola becomes impossible. She cannot be saved. Nicola Perrin, 30 years old, dies on the rope, in the cave that every caver in the world dreams of. William and Carolee fall back. Both are drained to the limit, both soaked through, and both have just watched a companion die before their eyes. One they could not help. They find a spot above the water and stay there, with no communications, almost no food, in the cold, beneath the unrelenting roar of the river. There's nowhere to send a call for help. Ordinary radios can't cut through hundreds of meters of rock. All that's left to them is to hold on and wait. For the second team of 3, things are even worse in that hour because they're deeper. Istvan, Wolt, and Miklos are in the area of the -915 mark, where only a couple of 100 meters remain to the bottom. The flood catches them at a 27-meter cascade, a vertical step that can't be bypassed. Istvan is the first onto the rope. Exactly what happens in the next few moments has been reconstructed from his companion's accounts and from the position in which the rescuers would later find him. The torrent slams down on him and pins him against the rope. Under the blow of falling water, a person on ascenders is almost helpless, hands occupied, every movement coming at enormous cost. He cannot get out from under the waterfall. Istvan Torda, 25 years old, becomes the second person to die that night. Of the 6 who went underground on Saturday, 4 are left alive. Zsolt and Miklos watch their companion die and understand. No one can get through this cascade now. They pull back and find a ledge above the level of the rising water. And so, their own ordeal begins, nearly 50 hours in the flood, on a rock shelf 900 meters underground. The temperature is just a few degrees above freezing, their clothes are soaked, their food is running out, and they have to ration their light. Nearby, in the darkness, the river thunders, and they know their companion is gone. The Hungarians huddle together on the edge of hypothermia, not knowing the one thing that matters, whether anyone is even looking for them. The water drops with agonizing slowness. By the time the cascade finally quiets enough to give them a chance to move, they have almost no strength left to climb on their own. Now their lives depend on the people on the surface, and up there, everything is only just beginning to stir. Sunday evening on the Sornian Plateau passes in mounting anxiety. The group's checkout deadline comes and goes, and no one emerges from the cave. In a downpour like this, that could mean anything. The 6 of them may simply have stopped to wait it out in a safe place, as dozens of groups before them have done. Or they may not have had time to find that safe place. On Monday, the 8th of July, the anxiety becomes a distress call. The rains continue, the rainfall total is already counted in hundreds of millimeters, and the local rivers are bursting their banks. A scout team of local cave rescuers goes into the cave and runs into the impassable. Below the -250 mark, the shafts are roaring with water. The same vertical torrent that holds the 6 deep below refuses to let help down from above. A rescuer can descend through it only at the risk of repeating the fate of those he's searching for. And so begins the most agonizing part of any underground accident, the wait for the cave itself to let go. Up top, no one knows anything, whether the 6 are alive, exactly where they are, whether they have a dry place, how long they can last in the cold. The scouts check the level again and again, the forecasters watch for a break in the rains, and still the water doesn't drop. Only on Wednesday, the 10th of July, at 5:55 in the morning, does a full-scale rescue operation officially begin. By midday, a command post is set up on the plateau, near the hamlet of Molière. Volunteers of the Spéléo Secours, the National Cave Rescue Service in which professional rescuers are backed by hundreds of caver volunteers, are drawn in from all over France. Medics ready to work at depth arrive, along with signalers and helicopters. For the Gouffre Berger, this will be the largest rescue operation in its entire history. By this point, the people deep underground have been living in the flood for a 3rd day. And the rescuers heading down don't know who they'll find first, the living or the dead. The water finally begins to recede, and the lead pairs go down as fast as the cave allows. Fast doesn't happen. The flood has mangled the route. Ropes are cut and worn through by the torrent. Part of the rigging has been washed away along with its anchors, and the ledges are covered in fresh deposits of rock and mud. The rescuers have to re-rig sections from scratch as they go, in water that is still high and still alive. At 18:54 on Wednesday, the first team reaches the area of the Cascade of the Topographers at -740. There, the rescuers find Nicola. She died back on Sunday night. A little higher up are William and Carly, alive. 3 days in the darkness, next to their dead companion, without a single signal from outside. Both are utterly exhausted, but able to speak and, with support, to move. That night comes the second word. At 23:50, the rescuers break through to the -915 mark and find the Hungarians. Zsolt and Miklos are alive, hypothermic, drained, having sat out on their shelf to the very end. Istvan is found where the water caught him. The tally of 3 days of uncertainty, 4 alive, 2 dead. Now they have to be brought up, and that is no easier than the search. The rigging is wrecked, and the men can barely stand. At a depth of 500 meters, an underground medical post is set up. Doctors descend down a kilometer of rope to treat the survivors right there in the cave, warming them, feeding them, putting in IV lines, judging who was able to climb on their own. On Thursday, William and Carolee are brought up to the bivouac at -500. The night is spent recovering strength, and then comes the final climb. Early in the morning on the 12th of July, William is brought to the surface and flown by helicopter to a hospital in Grenoble. By midday, Carolee follows. The first 2 are saved. Deep below, 2 living men still remain, and 2 who will never come out on their own. The Hungarians take longer to bring up, because they spent the most time deep down and were the lowest of all. Zsolt reaches the surface on Saturday, the 13th of July, at 6:50 in the morning, a week underground, 2 days of it motionless in the flood. Miklos is weaker, and in places he has to be carried on a stretcher through shafts and meanders. Painstaking work in which a stretcher with a person on it is hauled up the verticals on ropes with a system of pulleys. He is brought up on Sunday, the 14th of July, at 3 in the afternoon. 4 alive on the surface. The hardest task remains, bringing up the dead. Carrying a body up through hundreds of meters of shafts, squeezes and ledges is a multi-day operation that requires dozens of people in a relay chain. Nicola's body is brought to the surface on the 15th of July, Istvan's on the evening of the 16th. On the 17th of July, the prefecture declares the operation complete. The scale is told by the numbers in the final report. According to the Isère Rescue Service's summary, 299 people were involved in the operation, for a total of almost 5,000 man-hours of work underground and 26 hours of helicopter flights. Different sources put the number of people anywhere from 190 to 300, depending on how each counted the staff, the signalers, and the underground teams. But the order of magnitude is clear. An army worked for 6 people. The rescuers brought out alive everyone who survived until they arrived, and they lost none of their own. For the French Cave Rescue Service, Berger 96 will become one of the benchmark operations of the decade, and yet two did not come back. Almost as soon as the last stretcher leaves the plateau, the reckoning begins. How did this happen to people who could do everything, and could they have been saved? One of the answers to that question will change cave rescue forever. The inquiry finds no one to blame in the usual sense. The group was experienced, the equipment sound, the technique competent. The weather was good when they entered the cave, and the storm that dumped 3 times more water on the plateau than the forecast promised caught up with the people already at depth, where there was no way to learn of it. The verdict was handed down by the geometry of the Berger itself. When the line of the climb coincides with the line of the falling water, a person on the rope in a flood has almost no room to maneuver. Nicola and Istvan died not because they made a mistake, but because they happened to be on the vertical at the hour the river came down it. Nicola's family and friends in Britain answer this in their own way. They create a memorial fund with one specific goal: to bring communication underground. The engineer and caver Graham Naylor, together with French and British colleagues, develops a low-frequency radio capable of transmitting the human voice not along wires and not through the cave's passages, but straight through the mass of the mountain. The system is named after her, the Nicola Cave Radio. In testing, it punches through a kilometer of solid rock. The Nicola Cave Radio is adopted by the rescue services of France and Britain. Its descendants still work on real underground operations today. The system's creators said it plainly. Had such communication existed in July of 1996, the group could have been warned of the storm in time, and there might have been no deaths at all. The Gouffre Berger remains a place of pilgrimage to this day. The system's depth is 1,271 meters. Dozens of expeditions come each summer. The booking rules are strict, and there is one hard demand: watch the sky. Floods still happen in the cave. What has changed is that now there's a chance to warn those below. The planet's first 1,000 took 2 strong cavers from the world and gave back in return a voice that passes through solid rock, a voice they call Nicola.